Hello, I'm Dr. Robbie Hooker, Superintendent of Clark County School District. And today I have with me Mr. Chris Griner, our Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Griner, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your path and how did you get here to CCSD?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hooker. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This is actually my second stint at Clark County School District. Was here in 2020 for a brief period of time. Was fortunate enough to come back in July of last year. My career spans 30 years of accounting experience,
Wow.
Split between banking for about 15, 16 of those years, and the rest has been in K through 12 education finance with several districts in the state of Georgia and South Carolina.
Well, we're very fortunate to have you here. Can you tell us some of your responsibilities and role as Chief Financial Officer?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Our business services department is broken down into four main areas. The first one that most everybody is familiar with is payroll.
Yes.
We want to make sure we get our employees paid on time and correctly, so that's our first big, area. Secondly, we want to make sure we get our vendors paid correctly, which is our accounts payable department, which also encompasses our purchasing department, making sure we're following board policies and procedures related to purchasing. Then we get into our accounting function, which is our state reporting. Where we're required to report to the state on an annual basis, the state of Georgia. So we do that through our accounting function. Handle all of our grant accounting also happens there. And then the last piece is the piece we do once a year, which is our budgeting process, where we work with you and the Board of Education to develop the general fund budget for each fiscal year.
We talk a lot about the budget and being good stewards of the budget. Tell us, where does the money come from to run the district?
Okay. So as I mentioned, we just recently passed our general fund budget back in June of a couple months ago. Total general fund budget of $242 million for this fiscal year, which is fiscal year 2025. We have two main revenue sources that cover the expenditures in that budget. One is our local property tax digest, which accounts for about 57% of our revenue.
Right.
So those values are assessed by the tax assessor's office each year, creates a tax digest, and then the Board of Education sets the millage rate. Our current millage rate is 18.8 mils.
Right.
The other big contributor to our revenue is the state of Georgia. We receive funding through the Quality Basic Education Act, which was passed back in 1985. So the state, as part of their budget process each year, determines if they're going to fully fund that formula. This year we were fortunate they did fully fund that formula.
Okay. All right, there's a lot of talk around our general fund balance. Could you give us a better explanation? Tell us in detail what that entails.
Sure. Our general fund balance is made up of years where we've had revenues that exceeded expenditures, and then that money accumulates over time, and it gives us, most standards say you want at least 3 months of payroll in fund balance. Our payroll is about $15 million a month. So right now, at the end of the fiscal year 2025, we expect to have about $49 million in fund balance, so we're a little over that 3-month threshold. So we feel like we're in good position with our fund balance.
Many people see the fund balance as a surplus. Can you tell us why we need it and what it is needed for?
Fund balance is very important just for any factor. As we discussed, our property taxes make up 57% of our revenues each year, roughly. Any economic downturn can impact those tax collections. The tax digest could start decreasing as well. State funding makes up roughly 37%. The state of Georgia sets a budget once a year. If economic downturns are in place, they're going to reduce our funding more than likely. Federal funding is always determined in Washington, D.C. There's always a lot of different factors that can impact that federal funding as well. We have been fortunate for the last 3 years to have ESSER funding in 3 different phases. The last phase of that is September of 2024, so we're at the end of that right now. So we realize that funding is going to go away.
You mentioned ESSER and ARPA. Explain what those are, why we receive those funds, and what we use the money to do as we recovered from COVID.
That's a great question. Our ESSER funding was part of an act that was passed by Congress during the pandemic, during COVID. That is actually, we received the funding in 3 different phases. So you might often hear it referred to as CARES 1, CARES 2, and then there's ARPA, which was the last piece of it. So there's those 3 different pieces of funding. Our total funding received at that time was $78.8 million.
Wow.
So again, as we mentioned, that's going away at the end of September. So then you start thinking about budget planning. The majority of that was spent, of course, on our students, supplemental learning, focusing on our at-risk student populations. School nutrition had a small piece of that, continuity of services, allowing us to continue to run the district during the pandemic. Mental health is such a big piece of that. So the mental health, the piece with our students, just making sure that mental health well-being is there as well. So that's where the majority of that money was spent. And we have a dashboard on our website which breaks that down in all those different areas where you can go through those different areas and see how we have spent that money over the last 3 years.
In addition to our general fund and ESSER and opera, does the district receive other money or have other funds to help with things like after-school programs or new school buildings?
We do. There's several different categories there. We receive Title I funding, which is for our economically disadvantaged students. It's based on our poverty rates as well as some other factors. We receive special ed funding for our special needs students. We other grant funds. School nutrition is a federally funded program. Our students we're fortunate that our students get to eat free breakfast and lunch. And then our after school program is actually a tuition or fee-based service at all of our elementary schools. We have done a really good job, I feel like, of keeping the cost down on that. We did have a slight increase this past year, but it's the first increase in roughly 17 years.
Wow.
The last piece that you mentioned is our building project. How do we build? You see Clark Middle when you're driving down the street and you go, that's a great building. How did they pay for that building? So we are fortunate. Every 5 years we have a referendum for eSPLOST, which is our Education Special Local Option Sales Tax. It's an extra 1 cent that's collected when you make a purchase in Clark County.
Right.
What I always like to emphasize, it's not just our taxpayers in Clark County, it's anybody who comes in from surrounding counties. We're very fortunate. UGA home games is always the one I think about. We have upwards over 100,000 people who visit Athens. Some of those are local residents, the majority of them are not. So that's where that 1 cent goes. Our last eSPLOST passed back in June of 22 is when the collection started on that.
Yes.
It will run through June of 27. The projects we've funded through the last eSPLOST, which is eSPLOST 6, are the Clark Middle School, brand new building. We're doing renovations at Cedar Shoals High School right now.
Right.
The third project on that is an addition to Gaines Elementary School, which is it's conceptually still in the works right now.
I know your department have a couple of initiatives that you'd like to talk about. Can you give us a little bit more information about those initiatives?
The biggest one we have right now is we had a disparity study done. The Board of Education did about a year ago. We just had a presentation on that at the board meeting last week, talking about our efforts to try to meet the recommendations from that disparity study. The biggest one was doing more business with minority-owned businesses, especially focusing on minority women-owned businesses. So we're trying to, reach out, do some education. We have a community advisory group that is also meeting to discuss how we can get better at that. We have a prime time with purchasing event that we're excited about. It's coming up October 26th. We'll be here at the board office from 11 to 2. We're going to bring vendors in that can help people try to become a vendor with Clark County School District.
Right.
One that we're especially excited about is a group called ACE, which is Access to Capital for Entrepreneurs, based out of Cleveland, Georgia. It's a nonprofit agency that tries to help small business owners, whether it be a low-cost loan or a loan with no collateral. They also educate how do you write a business plan. A lot of our small businesses, how do you do business with a governmental entity? There's as we mentioned, we have purchasing policies and procedures that have to be followed. Okay. So it helps them kind of navigate through that system. So we plan on having those at least, hopefully quarterly, at least twice a year, those events. Two other initiatives we have right now is trying to get our vendors paid a little bit more timely. It's not mailing quite as many checks. I think check fraud is so rampant right now. In my banking career, I've always kind of leaned on electronic payments. I think that's a more efficient way, definitely a little bit more secure way to get our vendors paid. So we are focusing on that. Hopefully, in the next few months, we're going to start converting more vendors over to that process. The last thing we've done is we created an online platform for all of our schools where parents can go in and pay for their students' fees, activities, an example, high school parking fees, parking permits. Parents or students can go online and pay for those now. A lot of times people don't necessarily carry cash that much anymore, or having to carry that to the school, or checks. It gives them the ability to do it from home and pay for those fees and activities.
Okay. Thank you for this great information and for spending time talking with me about CCSD Business Service Division. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today, but I'll see you again soon at Studio 595, Superintendent's Cut.